Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dungeon of Deadly Delights. I'm, of course, Rob DiLauro, and with me, as always, is Miss Holly Interlandi. Holly, what is going on?
Cheers. Just chilling with my pal Devilman here. Who's very excited for this episode.
Well, it's good to see you back from the cabin. Apparently, you didn't read any books while you were out there. So,
Yeah, no, I always do this thing where I go on vacation and I'm like, I'm gonna get all this shit accomplished, and then it just doesn't happen. So
mhm.
I floated on a lake and I ate a lot and I did some puzzles and I cleared my mind, which was nice. It doesn't don't
no,
get to do that very often. So
no Necronomicons or anything, though.
no, unfortunately. I mean, what a great setting though. I mean, all the old pine trees and shit.
Yeah. So this is episode 35 of Dungeon of Deadly Delights, and just want to let it be known right away that Holly probably knows quite a bit more about horror anime than I do. When it comes to the history, she's real good with names, unless it's some Spanish guy. But Japanese, you're pretty good with.
You're never gonna let me hear that. You're never gonna let me live that down ever.
It's hilarious. But yeah, I don't even know what a Japanese expert is, honestly. So so we're just showing our love for horror anime. Because it does deserve a place of mention when it comes to this genre. Really great storytelling within, and so that's why we're doing
Well,
this.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think more than anything, anime has the ability to blend genres like a lot. Like you never quite know what you're gonna get with an anime. Like you could get talking dogs and sparkly girls, or you could get like demon horns, or in the case of Overfiend, lots of demon dicks. So
We're about to get into that.
it depends. What my point is that anime is a medium, not a genre. So people who say things like I don't like anime or I'm not into anime are usually their perception of anime is a certain thing. And of course, we're going to be using this show to talk about demons and tentacles and vampires because that's what horror anime is. But
Sure.
it's by far not the only option out there. That's all I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. So before we start, what is your history when it comes to animation or comes to Japanese animation?
Well, I really got into it in college specifically because the first school I went to was in the middle of a cornfield in Ohio. There was nothing to do. There was a Blockbuster about 6 blocks up, and me and my friend must have rented every single VHS anime at that Blockbuster, every single one. And I saw most classic anime I saw dubbed first on VHS because I'm that old. But it just then it kept going. Like I transferred out to USC in Los Angeles, and I consumed it wholeheartedly for that whole period. About from like 1999 to 2005, I was just give me all the anime, and I think I still love it, but I think it's harder personally for me to get into particular shows now because there's so much that we get, like streaming services like Crunchyroll have basically ensured that, that we get almost everything. Whereas back, when I was in college, like it was a little more curated on this end. So the West would only get like, the tried and true anime, the ones that had stood the test of, of popularity or whatever. And now it's harder for me to find stuff because there's so like it just wading through all of the stuff is just a little bit more difficult. But I can still find stuff that's great. It just takes a little bit longer, if that makes sense.
Well, I think for me, just like everything else that I was, passionate about growing up, most horror films, music, and a lot of that stuff was, pretty much like taboo for the most part. So you just wanted to get more involved in it because it's like, oh, it's something nasty or naughty or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it was taboo, even the stuff that was supposedly like, the gateways to anime for that time period, was all, kind of, like, in the shadows and stuff, like, you got to see this and, whatever. So a lot of it came from like, going to comic book conventions, back in the day, and like getting like blank tapes off of tables and stuff. Some guy
And
like
then the
a
trench
trench
coat
coat
comes
going, "You
up
should
and he's
watch
like,
this."
"You
Yeah,
want to see some anime?"
yeah. Hey, you want to see some anime?
Uh,
But yeah, that's pretty much my my gateway into anime, and for a long time, for some reason like that, um, probably because your situation where it became like too mainstream,
too much of it, yeah.
where every kid in America is going yeah and all that shit, like it just really got on my nerves, I think, and I just let it go for a while. So, just like a lot of things, just recently I kind of became, I don't know, I guess the best way to put it is a born again weeb, because I just been rewatching it and just realizing, what incredible, like stories are within, like a lot of really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
Even in hentai, which, we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
I mean, I was talking about how it blends genres, which I think, I mean, I think is true for, even the earliest, like if you look at something like Akira, why not start big with Akira? Nobody, would call Akira a horror film necessarily,
Yeah.
but there are elements of that movie that are just terrifying. Like and of course at the end there's all the body horror, but then there you have the ESP, the psychics who age super fast, and so they're like little kids who have little wrinkly faces, and there's lots of nightmarish stuff, and so it's
well, that's something we touched into also with the film world too, is that like when it comes to genre films, I see a lot of people saying like, I wouldn't necessarily consider this a horror, but and if it's not bloody, if it's not slasher or whatever, it's automatically not a horror film. If it's you know what I mean, if it's more thought provoking or whatever, people are just like, I know this isn't a horror, but it is. And
yeah, well, I mean,
has...
it alternatingly, like you can be watching something and be like, oh, this is panoramic sci-fi, and then all of a sudden you're in a closed room with giant teddy bears, and it's very horror. So
yeah, dum 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 dum.
but I mean, Akira, the plot itself is just super unique. The animation is gorgeous. The story, I mean, you have the creator of the manga, Katsuhiro Otomo, actually directing the film. So, the direction of the story and the details are all there, which are basically that, that in 1988, this ESP psychic guy, Akira, basically causes the ultimate end of the world, nuclear war, a cataclysm in Tokyo, which wipes the city out. And then we flash forward to 2019. Imagine that. And we're in Neo Tokyo now. And there are still these...
Which is a mix between like Blade Runner and like a Clockwork Orange or something. You know what I mean?
Right? Yeah. Well, and of course, you've got the main aesthetic here is Takeda and his custom bike gang, riding around on their motorcycles. And these espers, these mind, I'm not really sure what to call them. These people with incredible mind powers are still around. Akira was the one that whose brain actually caused the destruction of Tokyo. But these other guys, they're still around. They're still being studied. They're still being protected. And what it takes is
the best way to put it. I think the best way to put it for people that aren't familiar with anime is Professor Xavier and Logan. You know what I mean? Like how he has the ability to just like take out like city blocks, just with his mind.
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. Professor X, just that kind of mind control. Except there are multiple Professor X's, and they're little kids, and it takes so much of a toll on their their body and their brain that they all look like mini old people.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is,
and one of them even mentions that actually to Tetsuo, that you're you shouldn't be taking on this power. You're not pure. Basically like stating that because he's older, he wouldn't be able to harness that power properly because he's got so much anger and rage and things that little kids don't have. He's not innocent. So
exactly.
You know what I mean?
But he does get it because in the biker gang, basically in a bike chase, Tetsuo ends up crashing, and not crashing into, but being in an explosion with one of these, mind controlling kids, and the powers get sort of transferred to him, not possibly not in a complete way, like they're sort of they're altered strangely, and maybe it's like you said, like he's not a kid. Tetsuo has been like a gang member his whole life, so putting that much mental power into a guy like Tetsuo is totally different than some like a 6-year-old, for example.
And they weren't a kind biker gang either. That's why I brought up the reference to Clockwork Orange, because they were doing some pretty heinous shit too.
Yeah.
So the other interesting thing about Akira is I remember when Adult Swim re-released it, like I think it was like 8 or 9 years ago or something like that. And it was a huge fucking event, and it was obviously it was they had American voice actors doing the voices, and it was a really, really awful rendition. It was terrible. But I do remember the actual dubbed version of the original like being really fucking good, like pretty much like top notch. So that's another thing that I was gathering from anime as a whole, like even the art of an American taking on one of those characters is in an art, it's kind of like an art form in itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Inflections and emotions that are very important, that have to come out in your performance.
Yeah, and the subtleties of language too. Like, it's funny that you bring up the dub because, as I said, most of my exposure to anime in the late '90s was through VHS dubbed versions, and I saw Akira dubbed, and and most of it made sense. Like, I was like, okay, I can follow this, but then I remember being completely confused at the end because, spoilers, by the end, Tetsuo is in an alternate, his consciousness is in an alternate dimension, but you hear his voice, basically his mind going, Tetsuo da, or Tetsuo des, which is just like, I'm still here, I exist. But the way they translated it on my dub was, I am Tetsuo. And I remember
that makes no sense. Yeah.
I remember like, that doesn't make any sense. like we know you're Tetsuo, what's going on? So for me, watching the dub made a big difference.
Yeah.
The sub, I mean. Rather.
Yeah. And I guess the only other the other thing to say about it is just, like, I think, aside from the motorcycle and all that stuff, like, I think probably the most, obviously the most iconic part of the movie is the final act where Tetsuo, basically becomes, this amalgamation of Akira, and he
the body horror, or it just explodes. It's like the thing in, it's like the giant mass of bodies in Slither. Like, it's just
Starla.
And I'm still disturbed by it. It's just super creepy.
But I mean, obviously, like, Akira was one of those gateway into anime films, especially when we were young. That was the one. I think it still is. I think to a lot of degrees.
Yeah, I mean, because it covers so much and it's still so impeccably made. So why start with anything lesser,
Yeah. So I want to get into vampire territory, which we're going to get into quite a bit in our conversation. It's just the way it is. Let's talk about Hellsing for a minute. Because as from what I'm gathering, I did not see Hellsing Ultimate, and I have not read the mangas for Hellsing. But they apparently took like a whole different road than what the.
That happens a lot. Not just because because of the adaptation, but because a lot of the time the anime is being created at the same time as the manga, so they sort of diverge that way.
Yeah.
Like so they don't have to wait for the manga artist to catch up, essentially. But
Yeah, it's a pretty simple premise. I mean, you've got this village that's pretty much plagued by vampires. There's this one human girl named Cirrus Victoria, and she's in a situation where she gets bit. And there's this team that supposedly has this, doctrine not to hire vampires into their crew, but they just happen to have one, and his name is Alucard. Just a badass dude. I mean, all the way around, really good one-liners. And so he saves Cirrus Victoria, makes her a vampire, and they hunt vampires and Nazis and all kinds of shit. It's
and it's a really great example, and Nazi vampires hunting Nazi vampires. but it's also a really good example of how there's a lot of tradition in horror anime to take the monster to fight that monster kind of thing, like whether it be a hybrid of the monster and human, or whether it takes like the inside knowledge of a particular creature to beat the other creature. Like there's a lot of that, and we're going to talk about a couple more examples of it. But I think Hellsing is a really good one. That Alucard, and Hellsing is the organization that apparently was named after the original Van Helsing, because he defeated Alucard, who then pledged his loyalty to the organization. And the leader of the organization is now Sir Integra, who's just this badass. Like, let me say, 85% of Hellsing is style.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was just about to say that. Yeah.
Jazz influenced soundtrack, or like the trench coats, or like the World War II firearms, or just all that stuff. Like you just feel cool when you're watching it, and it's not. I mean, it's not a bad thing. Like I own both Hellsing soundtracks, and they're freaking great.
Aside from Cirrus Victoria, who has to show her ass in hot pants, and
well, I mean, there's always one. But in the same anime, you have Integra, who's technically who's a female and yet dresses just like the rest of her soldiers. So, it's interesting how there's that dichotomy in a lot of anime where sometimes you have a character who's clearly written to be the female fan service character, and then you have another character who just happens to be female, who sort of acts like
fan service. We mean,
yeah.
Male enjoyment. Yeah, it's just weird, just like, okay, Victoria, you're part of the team now. Congratulations. Here, put on these short pants and this belly shirt. Let's go fight some.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty funny, but it happens. I mean, I don't know. It happens a lot in anime, like where there's one character, like this isn't a horror anime, but it's one of my favorites. Like in Gundam, for example, there are certain characters who are clearly written to be the girl.
Yeah.
And then there are other characters who are soldiers, who are then, written to be female, but are also clearly written to be gender neutral.
Right.
So it's almost like, I mean, the Japanese are notorious for their misogyny. They're about 50 years behind every other civilization when it comes to that. I mean, it's really bad.
Yeah.
But
that's another thing we're going to get into also, is that, I mean, there's no other better way to put it, but, they have a different, idea of the theory of relativity, we'll call it, when it comes to you can fuck with your family and all kinds of stuff.
I'm going to call incest theory of relativity from now on.
Theory of relativity.
Good. That's good. Well, yeah, but they also have a different view of sex. I mean, their age of consent is 14, which completely, I mean, it's just a totally different world. So it just makes you sort of go, oh, okay. Like you have to pull back and look at it in a certain context. But there's a lot of the misogyny, that like the historical traditional misogyny, alongside them trying to like be forward and progressive. So you sometimes you see both in the same anime, which I think might be the case with Hellsing as well.
Yeah. All right. What's next on your list?
Yeah, so since we were doing vampires with Hellsing, I thought I would go back down to what is also considered one of the great gateway drugs of anime, and that is Hideki Kikuchi's Vampire Hunter D.
Nice.
You know, it's you know a series of novels illustrated by the great Yoshitaka Amano. Oh, that was made into an animated film in 1985, and it's
Very
just a
much inspired by the old Hammer horror films,
yeah,
things of that nature.
yeah, absolutely. There are lots of breaking chandeliers and like wind and again, it's another example of that, you know, become the monster to fight the monster trope. Because we have D, the main character, who's sort of like a wandering lone gunman in a way. Like there's sort of a Western angle there. He's
Mhm.
riding across the desert on his horse, you know, like saving towns, going from village to village. Like it's very U.S. Western in that way.
Yeah,
Um,
and the cool thing about it too is that like it does have this apocalyptic feel to it, and
yeah,
also kind of feels very cyberpunk when it comes to certain weapons that towns have or he
yeah,
has. Or,
yeah. It's like it's a whole bunch of things at once, and I think that's part of why it's been so popular is because there's just
something for everybody.
there's so much to it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you have D, of course, who's a Dhampir. He's the child of a vampire and a human. So he's basically a half breed, what they call him, and you know, and he goes around basically tackling these vampire threats from from aristocratic vampires who own like great swathes of land and villagers and treat their villagers like shit.
Hmm.
And it's basically D fights a lot of demons, and he stabs a lot of stuff, and it's all really cool. But I have to bring up one of the greatest comedic devices
Mm.
ever introduced in an anime, and that is left hand.
Left hand. Yeah.
Because the great thing is if I remember correctly, in the original film, they don't actually show left hand's
No,
face.
you actually think like either D is crazy or that's like the narrator, and it turns out
Yeah,
it's actually his
yeah.
hand.
You're like, is he talking to himself? Like, who is this guy who's like wisecracking about everything D does? Like, well, you're not gonna do it. Like, it's
Yeah,
this
and he's all like,
super
"Shut up," and he's like really angry.
right. And you're like, is he talking? Like, is this multiple personalities? And it's not until like halfway through the film that you realize that D has a face on his hand
Face on his hand, literally
that
face.
is doing all this talking, wisecracking, and also happens to possess certain end game kind of powers, such as sucking things into his void and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So Left Hand is just iconic. I love it so much.
Well, here's the bummer of the whole thing. Because Japan has this tendency to kind of contradict themselves when it comes to like how they feel about certain situations, especially when it comes to women. You have a really strong potential character within Doris.
Yeah.
But she just becomes this fucking damsel that he saves not once, but twice. He actually has to go back to that castle twice. And, it just, I don't know. It's disheartening because that character could have really been pretty spectacular. She's
Yeah. Well, I
cute,
mean,
you know what I
they
mean?
could. I mean, the thing with Vampire Hunter D is that there's so many novels now. I mean, they went on and made, at the turn of the millennium, they went on and made Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust,
Yeah.
which I think is fantastic. I love it. It's directed by the same guy who did Ninja Scroll, Yoshiaki Kawajiri.
Right.
And it's the animation is just gorgeous. Like,
Yeah.
even if you don't want to watch the story, just watch it for the animation because it's beautiful. And it's actually, the Bloodlust is actually, it's not really a remake at all. It's sort of like a continuing or a sequel of sorts, or a reimagining. And they have a very different twist to the ending that I really appreciate. So you never know. I mean, maybe there's more Vampire Hunter D in our future. There's a video game, so why not?
Yeah, that's true. God, I wish we could talk about fucking with Fist of the North Star. Yeah.
Fist to the North Star. Oh man, that's a little 280s even for me.
So let's talk about let's get into some really deep territory here. Something that we've been wanting to talk about for a long fucking time.
Oh yeah.
Around the time me and you started working together, we wanted to actually do an entire podcast devoted to fucking this movie. So yeah, we're gonna get into some really wild shit here, guys. So hold your baby ears, and we're probably gonna need a disclaimer for this shit. Uh,
Yeah.
um,
Foul talk approaching.
foul talk approaching.
Viewer discretion advised.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Legend of the Overfiend, which you and I are both familiar with in our travels.
One of the great. See, I don't really watch hentai. Really, I mean, most of it just doesn't really interest me because it's just. I mean, it's like a lot of mainstream porn. It's just there's not really an angle that I find attractive to it.
Yeah.
But Legend of the Overfiend is, there's enough like plot
cool
going on and enough awesome demon design and story development that, you could watch the whole thing and you can almost forget that there's, I mean, tentacle rape and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But, it's you can almost look past that because the film is so, it's so much fun, really.
Yeah.
Like, in every way, not just in a titillating way or whatever. Like, I just love it. Like, I think when I first watched it, I wrote a review of it, and my review was just said all you need to know about this movie is that there's a scene wherein a guy chops off his own dick so he can attach a super demon dick and thus gain its super demon dick powers.
Mm. Well, all right, so let's get into the plot because there actually is one.
There is a plot, strangely enough. It just involves a lot of dicks.
Apparently, in this world, there are 3 different universes. There's the monster world, the beast world, and the human world. And so it gets into that, exposition and stuff. And basically, we end up in this, like, Porky's, like, Revenge of the Nerds high school where this demon named Amano Jaku, he is actually a student there. And him and his horny sister and this thing that constantly has a heart on, this little
flying goblin dude. Like, even the flying goblins have dicks in this movie. If you don't like dicks, don't watch this movie.
So they're looking for the one, technically.
Chojin.
Yes, that's right. And basically it's just like just a creature of immense power that tends to arise when they're feeling.
Well, and he comes around like every 3,000 years or so, or whatever, to like bring great balance to the world or whatever. Right. Which is that's the general conceit, but most of this movie, like, the powers are transferred through like jizzing on someone or like licking somebody's blood or like having sex with them. Like, this is not your typical like savior bullshit.
So there's a nerdy dude that's really into this like really cute gymnast, and he's actually like in like a situation where he's actually jerking off, and this fucking basketball just like super athlete guy sees him and throws a fucking basketball at his face, and just looks at him and just like licks the blood off his face, which is because
hey, why not?
Because jocks,
because jocks.
So she ends up in a situation where she ends up, I guess, in the principal's office, and turns out the principal's a demon, and she starts sprouting all these fucking monster dicks, and it's a lot of fun. And this guy is just sitting there in the peephole, just like, like he's all fucking excited about it. Like, I don't know whether I should save her or like, just enjoy this. And then, of course, Manu Jaku kind of gets into, like, I guess Super Saiyan mode, and he fucking, saves her life. And I think she's fucking unconscious or something, and sees him, and, like, she falls in love with him. Like, immediately. Like, I love you with all my heart, and I want to fuck you because anime.
Because anime.
And then there's this other dude that's really jealous, because she's in love with this other guy, and he makes a deal that Holly was talking about where, like, if you attach this demon dick to yourself, you become the all-powerful one. And
yep.
And then the funny thing is that they actually thought the jock was the Shojin, and he gets like evaporated in the first fight he ever gets into.
Yeah. He gets like lured into the hallway by a bunch of demons and basically gets like annihilated.
Right. So he's obviously not the one. And then we get into a moment where he finally has the love of his life in his bedroom, and this actually happens twice because I think he was in the hospital and he ended up getting horny with the nurse and like, you know, fucking like basically like just went through the roof and he's all like, like all huge.
Everybody's horny in this movie.
Yeah, and they fucking like, I think they just blew it off as like, you know, some weird anomaly or something like, it's nothing, don't worry about it.
A monster came through the ceiling. Who knows what that is?
So he's in the situation where he's finally in the room with the love of his life and she's like, take me, I'm yours and I love you and all this other shit. And then he fucking turns her around and you're like, uh-oh. Uh-oh. And her fucking eyes start lighting up and shit. And then all of a sudden he's like, and he fucking like rips through the roof and all fucking chaos happens.
It's truly incredible. It's one for the monster fuckers, I'd say, which has become like, I mean, they've always existed. I feel like they really came to the forefront with Shape of Water, where they were just like, monster fuckers unite!
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it's a thing.
Yeah, but, you know, that ass, though, you know. What's next?
No, in all seriousness, if you can handle the dick, Legend of the Overfiend is a super fun movie. It really is.
I think so, too. What's next on your list?
Well, I'm going to keep with the demon theme, actually, and talk a little bit about my main man here, Devilman, who has been around since, you know, the early 70s when Go Nagai created him. There was
a great Rob Zombie song, by the way, Devilman. It's awesome.
Lots of great songs called Devilman. I think he just inspires people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an original anime series from the 70s. Then there's a movie, you know, Devilman versus Mazinger Z, because Go Nagai created Mazinger and it became all popular. And he was like, wait a minute, check out Devilman. This is my favorite masterwork. And then there were a series of OVAs in the 80s. Devilman The Birth. And then I forget what the second was called, but the third one is basically The Apocalypse.
Right.
And then the most recent, those OVAs actually like followed, you know, the continuing story of the manga, which has been going for years and years and years. And I think recently there was another like reimagining of the story that's, I think, one on Netflix called Devilman Crybaby, which I haven't seen yet. Hopefully, hope to remedy that very soon.
Is that the one where he has a tattoo of a teardrop on his eye and Iggy Pop is his fucking...
yeah, it's pretty stylistic and gnarly. But I would like to go back and praise the original 1972 TV series.
Yeah.
This series is it doesn't, because it was airing at the same time that Go Nagai was writing the manga. It doesn't, you know, venture into the eventual awesomely gay apocalyptic territory with fallen angel Satan who falls in love with Akira and inadvertently ends up causing the apocalypse and all this stuff. All that great stuff that comes later on in the manga. The original Devilman series is basically a Monster of the Week show. It's 39 episodes of demons fighting each other. And basically the way it begins is Akira Fudo, who's like a teenager, and his dad are hiking in the Himalayas. And they have an accident, basically, and Akira falls to his death. And these three demons, because there's a sanctuary of demons hiding away in the Himalayas. These three demons show up. One of whom is Amon, the aka Devilman, and he possesses Akira's body as sort of a, you know, sort of a way to disguise himself, to go back and infiltrate the human world, and, you know, and invite all of his demon friends to come and, you know, annihilate humanity and all that fun stuff. But what happens is that the human Akira Fudo was living with a girl, Miki, and her family, and the half Devilman Akira creature falls in love with Miki and decides to become a human, stay human, and defend her, and thus defend the human race. And this does not go over well with the demon lord. He's like, no way, man, this is not cool. You know, we have to kill Devil Man now. So the rest of the show is basically the demon lord sending demon after demon to kill this guy. And these aren't just like any regular old garden variety Christian demons with like forked tails and whatever. Like the Japanese tradition of like yokai, like the spirits or monsters, has just made this roster of monsters so entertaining and colorful. Like, you know, there's slug monsters, there are hawk monsters and cat monsters, and there are these things called the 3 Eye Brothers, and they each have a different number of eyes, and they can switch their eyes between them and stuff. And they're the demon generals, who are basically like giant furry things with mouths in their chests and like dogs for heads. Like, it's all just really creative stuff. It's really, really super creative. And the battles are great to watch. I mean, it's a classic anime in that the power of your move is directly proportional to how loudly you yell the name of the move at the beginning. So, Devil Beam! Devil Kick! So, yeah. And then,
is there a particular style of that type of animation? Because obviously I equate it to like Speed Racer and
Yeah, well, it's all I mean, it's classic. It's very it's all very influenced by Tezuka, I would say. Osamu Tezuka, the god of comics, because the that's back before there were all these other influences, and a lot of Japanese comics were trying to mimic Tezuka's style, because he was the king. He was the creator of Astro Boy.
Yeah.
And also the creator of tons of other stuff.
Wow.
But yeah, it's great. And like I said, the original series, I mean, it's just full of like cheesy 70s guitar music. Like the opening theme is like Darega, Darega, Kore wa Deivo. It's cheesy as hell. And like I said, it doesn't involve the apocalyptic plot the manga does, but in the final episode, Devilman does end up having to go up against God, who is also a demon.
That's beautifully sacrilegious.
Somehow. Which, yay, go Japanese and their creative blasphemy. I mean, shit.
So I want to talk about one that's very popular, super popular, with a lot of people, and they did make a live action movie on it with Willem Dafoe as the voice of Ryuk, which was fantastic casting, if I do say so myself. I think that's a great voice for that character. But of course, we wanted to bring up Death Note for a second, which really has a solid fucking premise.
Yeah, it's very creative.
Yeah. The fact that you can actually, like, if you know the person, if you're familiar with the person, with their facial recognition and all that stuff, if you actually write their name in the book, then you can actually like kill them through like a heart attack or whatever anomaly happens to them after.
Yeah, well, I mean, what happens is the Shinigami, the death demon, drops his death book, which is the Death Note, and Light Yagami, it's a high school kid, finds it, and he fools around with it, and I mean, it's of course it's a supernatural book, and he discovers that, well, as you said, that you can write people's names in it and kill them. But that's just the tip of the iceberg with this thing.
Oh, certainly, yeah. So he actually goes big and goes home with this idea of this Death Note, and to, I guess, bring balance. He wants to like take out all the mobsters and horrible people in the world, which I think is awesome. Such a good idea. You know what I mean? Because he could just go like, oh, I fucking hate that kid. Like, he tripped me in study hall or whatever. No, he's like, you know what? I'm going to fucking take out like really big, horrible people.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that idea of it in particular, Anything else?
Well, eventually he gets an arch nemesis, as they all do. An arch nemesis named L. And they I mean, it's really hard to explain how they keep upping the stakes with this Death Note, but
doesn't it turn out that Light was actually a Fed or some shit, and that's probably like,
I didn't read that far.
I didn't read that far. Okay.
No. But it gets really convoluted with like the technique of using the Death Note, and like because there are a bunch of rules Like there are very specific rules for using the Death Note and what happens according to those rules.
Yeah.
And basically Light gets so good at it that he's able to manipulate the rules in a way that just he always comes out on top. You know, it's just really impressive stuff.
Yeah.
And it's very cool. It's really cerebral, which I really appreciate. It's not just a bunch of like, I mean, I love demon battles, as you know, but Death Note is something a little different.
What's next on your list?
Well, I went back recently and watched a couple of films that from the late '90s that I discovered back when I was first watching anime.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is Kite, which is actually kind of a short film. It's like 45 minutes, 50 minutes long. It's I don't want to say it's typical assassin stuff, but the main character Sawa is a teenage girl, and she's been raised to be an assassin by the chief detective, who also has this alter ego who's like a mob guy and like directing her to pick people off. And she's also sort of his sex slave.
Yeah.
In a weird way. But she is she's very alluring and like schoolgirl, she's got the skirt and everything, but she's also a badass, basically. The anime opens with a really douchey sort of famous actor trying to take her back to his pad or whatever. And she, he lets his guard down and she shoots him. And what makes Kite super gory, or one of the things, is that these special bullets that Sawa uses,
like open you up from the inside or something.
Yeah, not only pierce the skin, so you shoot somebody and you got the regular bullet effect, then the bullet that's lodged in them explodes. So it's like double whammy blood. Sawa ends up meeting another assassin, a young boy who's sort of her age, who's being employed by the same organization. And they start, hanging out and stuff, and there's a lot of contrast between their assassin lives and this sort of innocent way that they just chill, like the guy goes up to the attic of his building and like feeds stray cats, and they're just sort of hanging out and chilling. And it's sort of that idea. It's like, oh, there's life beyond this super violent way of doing things. And it's pretty straightforward in that way, but it's very satisfying. The ending is great, and also it does a great job at making a point about just like the cycle of violence, that if you do that kind of stuff, like there's really no escaping it. Like you can try to run away from the world of assassins and be happy and free, but you're never really free.
Never really free. Yeah.
It's gonna come back and bite you in the ass every time.
I want to talk about one. I'd say it's another popular one. It's called Tokyo Ghoul. The one thing that I really love about this one in particular, I mean, they're not necessarily reinventing the wheel or anything, but I do love it when a monster is present within the world space. You know what I mean? It's not like in the shadows. It doesn't just like, come out at night or whatever. Like everybody's familiar with it, from law enforcement all the way down to the citizens. And that's kind of the premise with Tokyo Ghoul, is that these ghouls live amongst you. So, there is the fear of them either devouring you or, just being nicer and doing nicer stuff. You know what I mean? So there is there is a mixture there. Not everybody's like, completely like, I just want to kill fucking, humans and shit like that. It's more, either, a survival instinct, obviously, because everybody's got to fucking eat, or, so Tokyo Ghoul is based on this one kid who dare I say, call him sort of he's a little bit of a pussy.
Well, I mean, hey, a lot of the main male characters in anime are generally pretty weak.
Oh, for sure.
They start off as pussies, and then they have to discover some power within themselves.
Discover some power and become, and that's pretty much what happens with this. So he's absolutely like head over heels for this, young girl. And they go out on their date together, and it's, kind of a sweet moment. And then all of a sudden she turns around and takes a hunk out of this dude, and like pretty much like, you know, chases him to fucking, you know, to track him down to you know, devour him, to eat him. He somehow gets out of the situation, but he gets really hurt in the process. Of course, you know, not only just the chunk of flesh taken out of him, but he wakes up in the hospital and finds out that this, you know, the girl that he's loved for so long, like, you know, basically he's got her organs inside of him. So, you know, there was that situation, kind of like Return of the Living Dead 3, where like, you know, he's trying to do everything to, you know, just kind of quell that hunger. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to do this. This is not what I'm about.
Yeah.
And everything else, you know, food wise, you know, because of course it's, you know, like an anime with teens and stuff, and he's into hamburgers and all that shit. Like, all of it's disgusting to him all of a sudden. And then it gets into like territory and, you know, meeting new characters, and he kind of, there's this female ghoul that takes him under a wing, so to speak, and, you know, shows him the different powers that they have. Like, they can actually, like, you know, they can take, you know, certain parts of their body and, you know, kind of morph them and stuff to, you know, make them into weapons and shit. It's really a beautiful fucking anime too. It's gorgeous looking. You know, and it doesn't seem like they really spared any expense with the main characters or the actual, you know, like the physical effects of those characters themselves. It's gorgeous to look at.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it's just basically, you know, you've got the side of the ghouls, and then you've got this, you know, other crew, as, you know, there's always one, you know what I mean? Like this CCG, I think they're called. And, you know, it's like this organization against the ghouls, and there's this whole, you know, this whole other plot and stuff. I didn't really get into the second or third season, but I did love what I saw from the first. And although I wouldn't call it a masterful anime, it's a lot of fun to watch. And like I said, it's just beautiful to look at. And I just love the idea that, you know, the monsters live amongst you, as opposed to, you know, just coming out and, you know,
And that people know about them too, which is really cool.
yeah, that's
There's only so far you can go with, like, there's a secret underground demon world and no one is aware. It's like,
well, it's got a really great opening, because there's this one ghoul. They actually like call her by name, because, you know, she had, you know, she's a bit of a glutton, and she's like eaten like 7 or 8 people or something like that. And I think there's actually like the cops even know that there's like a limit, you know, to how many bodies they can consume in a certain amount of time, and all kinds of shit. Like, everybody knows everything about these ghouls. You know what I mean?
They've been studying them for a long time.
Yeah, they've been around for a long time doing this shit. But yeah, I really love that notion of them living amongst us.
Yeah.
What's next on your list?
Well, going along with Kite, with the late '90s anime that I went back to revisit, I thought I'd go back and watch what's really a masterwork and very unique, and not like any other anime we've talked about so far, and that's Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue.
Yeah.
Perfect Blue is it's a horror thriller, sort of, but it's a psychological one. It takes place entirely, supposedly, in the real world. Like, there are no monsters or demons or anything, but it's so, you know, twisted and bizarre with like its perception of reality.
It was Black Mirror before Black Mirror, kind of.
Yeah, or, you know, it's basically, the story involves a
or Black Swan.
Yeah, I don't know if Darren Aronofsky's ever been interviewed about it and asked about Perfect Blue, but I really see a lot of Perfect Blue in Black Swan.
I think he was inspired by it somewhat. I don't know. I haven't seen it.
Anyway, the film actually follows a pop, who is currently a pop star, Mimi. Mima, not Mimi. She's part of a pop, you know, a pop group called Cham, and she decides to leave the group so she can pursue a career as an actress. And there is someone, some hyper fan of hers, some super creepy stalker fan, who is not a fan of this idea, wants her to stay a pop star forever. And the more she gets into the acting world, like the more controversial roles she takes on, you know, the the deeper she gets into her character, the crazier this mysterious fan gets. And there's a whole bunch of like just messed up stalker stuff. And it's very twisty because they follow a creepy stalker fan throughout the film that you think is, you know, the one doing all of this, until you find out that he's actually just been manipulated by this other person.
Mm-hmm.
But it's incredibly like surreal, you know. She stars in a soap opera that's about, you know, a serial killer with multiple personalities, and so, you know, it'll flash back and forth between her acting career and her real life, and it'll have her waking up and being like, did that happen? Did that really happen? What's going on? It's just masterful. Like, you know, the murder scenes are just as, you know, unnerving as they would be in any, you know, other suspense thriller. It's just, it's fantastic. It's put together in a perfectly little encapsulated package. And I mean, Satoshi Kon is, you know, tragically one of the greatest anime directors we've ever had. I mean, Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, Paprika, you know, Paranoia Agent.
40 something, right?
Yeah, he died of cancer when he was like 45. And it's just freaking horrifyingly sad because the stuff he did give us is just genius. And Perfect Blue is probably his seminal masterwork.
Yeah, so let's talk about Wicked City, because, you know, beautiful fucking anime, by the way. I mean, really beautifully, you know, done. I can't remember who the director was for that. Who was it?
He's actually, I think it's the same guy who did Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust and Ninja Scroll and Demon City Shinjuku, which I've actually seen. Yoshiaki Kawajiri.
Nice.
Apparently he had an obsession with demons and cities because he has a lot of Neo Tokyo, Demon City Shinjuku, like a bunch of like urban monster tales. So.
Yeah. So Wicked City is interesting because, you know, like it's pretty much a simple premise where you have, you know, the human world is trying to, you know, keep, you know, pact with the demon world, and they have to actually, like, you know, sign this, like, you know, physical agreement so that, you know, peace can actually continue. So there's sort of like this Men in Black situation where you've got this one human agent in his female partner who's a demon agent, and they have to basically protect this really horny, you know, like 1,000-year-old man, you know, to make sure that he signs this fucking document the next day. And, you know, of course he's into, like, you know, reading Playboy and, you know, that whole thing. Yeah, you know, he's just got he likes going to bathhouses.
Getting worse than Playboy.
Right. So they just have to keep him alive for one day. And the interesting thing about this one is that, you know, well, first of all, for most of it, it kind of plays like, you know, like a James Bond or Go-Go 13 or something like that. It's like, you know, very like, you know, spy or something like that, or like mob related kind of shit, and could work on its own if you didn't have like all these supernatural elements to it. But, you know, there's one thing that we never really got into when it comes to anime. You know, there is a lot of unlawful or unwanted entry when it comes to a lot of these things. And Wicked City is no different. It happens to this female agent quite a bit, actually, because it turns out that anybody, human, demon, or whatever, are trying to hunt her down because, you know, apparently that demon WAP is the best shit ever. But it actually takes your life force away when you do it. But people don't give a shit. Like, guys are just like, you know what? I want that prize, and I'm gonna fucking, you know, I'm gonna get it however I want to. But yeah, so Wicked City is like, it's weird. It's like, you know, like I said, like, you know, Japan has a tendency to contradict themselves because, you know, you have her as this, you know, hapless sex victim, but at the same time, it also shows women in a very powerful light, especially when it comes to sexuality. You know, the fact that, you know, her body, you know, like through sex becomes like spindly, and she becomes almost like a praying mantis of some sort. And I really dig that aspect of it. You know what I mean? Because it's showing that, you know, there is, you know, there is power in sex also. You know what I mean? That's the conversation that we're having right now in 2020, which is crazy to me. You know what I mean? Because I've always, supported sex workers and all that stuff. I don't get all, like all bristly about any of that shit. But yeah, it's just I think it's a really solid anime. It's just really beautiful to watch. It kind of looks like his design work reminds me of like Aeon Flux or something like that. If you remember, like Liquid Television.
Yeah, of course. I'm old enough to remember Eon Flux.
Yeah, yeah. So it's got that kind of art style to it. It's really gorgeous to look at. It really is. Definitely worth a mention. But yeah, it's graphic as fuck. So if you're looking for like One Piece or something, this ain't it. I don't know. There's two trains of thought when it comes to this, particular anime. There's a lot of people like myself that think it's like really just a fucking work of art for so many reasons. Not to mention the fact that it actually inspired the Duffer Brothers to create the 11 character for Stranger Things, which is kind of mind-blowing when you hear that people were actually inspired by anime. You know what I mean? Because you don't really, think of the broad scope of it and, how influential it actually is.
Well, and it's funny because I consider Lucy to be much more of an interesting character than 11 in a lot of different ways.
Oh, for sure. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about Elfenlied, which is an odd name because it basically in German it derives into elf song and has nothing to do with fucking elves.
Except for the fact that the certain race of people infected with the virus have bones that stick out of their skull that sort of look like cat ears.
Little cat ears, yeah.
So they're sort of like elfy with like their pointy ears, but
they're sort of adorable.
That's really the only connection I can make.
They're sort of adorable. It's like bony cat ears. Yeah, that's the best way to put it.
Cute. Like in any other anime, maybe like, oh, a little cat person, and then the heads start exploding, and you're like,
yeah. So basically, Elfenlied is, like historically known for being one of the most gruesome, brutal animes there has ever been. With these, I was telling Holly that I own the manga. My son is constantly trying to get into them because they have these little adorable, girls on the front, and it's just like, no, like, no, you cannot have these. There's, you can't, it's pretty dark. Basically it's a race of human. They're called dicloni, and dicloni have the ability, if they actually cross pollinate with a human, then obviously that, like you'll birth a dicloni, and that, once that, child reaches a certain age, it automatically has the urge to kill you because you're a human being, like automatically. So it has to do with, of course, with the euthanasia of these, particular, people and stuff. And there's one that technically is called like the queen of the dicloni. Her name is Lucy. And really great fucking opening where she escapes.
Okay, let me just say, I consider myself a connoisseur of exploding heads.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I first read issue 6 of Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, when Nee goes to heaven and gets head exploding, as he calls it, and can explode people's heads, by thinking about it. Like, I always tell people, like, my number one advice for horror writers is to explode as many heads as you can. Mm-hmm. And on that note, Elfenlied is absolutely impeccable. So many exploded heads, so many exploded bodies, and they do it. What's really cool is they do it in a way that's not just like, oh look, boom, his bodies explode. Like they animate the characters as if the diclonius are going into their mind and they're feeling it, and they're sort of splitting apart, and it's really effective the way they do it. Well,
there's a reason why, because a lot of people think that they're doing it through ESP, which is not the case. They have these supernatural hands they call vectors. Yeah. And these vectors actually have the tendency to take people and rip them apart. So you're not necessarily seeing the hands all the time. You're just seeing people's heads exploding and stuff, but it's actually them being torn asunder by these ghost hands that are coming out of these diclonius.
And they have different numbers of ghost hands depending on who it is.
Yeah, they have ranges.
Ranges of like how far away you can be and how many hands they have, and yeah.
So basically what happens is once this one character, Lucy, escapes, she gets shot in the head, and there's really no better way to put it, but, you know, she's mentally handicapped after that, and, you know, thinks she's basically, I don't know, like a 14-year-old girl maybe, who is also kind of like a household pet and is very sexually promiscuous.
She just walks around going, new,
New,
new, new.
new, new. So yeah, she, you know, she basically, she takes up with this, this cousin team, and, you know, as we said, the theory of relativity, these cousins are, you know, in love with each other, more than just family. I don't know. There's just so much to say about it that we want to talk about on the podcast, but, you know, it's, I don't know. I would say the story is actually, you know, pretty solid for the most part when it comes to, you know, just Lucy herself. It really is, it's kind of depressing. Like her entire life is just fucking terrible. She's
Well,
never.
yeah, because I mean, I don't know. I find it much more believable and, you know, and fascinating that someone like Lucy with that kind of power and that kind of abnormality, if you want to call it that, would feel so alienated by humanity that you know, some other horrible side of her takes over and wants to kill everyone.
Yeah.
Like, I find that much more realistic than, you know, somebody who's just been tortured and still wants to belong. Like, I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but I don't know. I mean, I think that's what makes Elfenlied tragic is because you know that she kills all these people because.
So this one male character, Kota, and her actually had an interaction when they were kids, when she was an adopted child. And she didn't really flex her powers until this really horrible scene happens where these bullies like basically throw a dog against the wall and she fucking.
Yeah, that was hard to watch.
Yeah. So she brutally tears them apart because of that. And you know, so when she has this interaction with Kota, it's the first time as a child she actually feels anything, like feels appreciated, feels like a human being, feels like anything. And you know, like she feels betrayed by him because, you know, he's going to a fair and tells her that you know, you probably shouldn't come along with me because I'm meeting my male cousin. And she actually follows them to the fair and realizes that he's, you know, going to meet his girl cousin, who he eventually, you know, falls in love with. Promises, you know, his heart to, basically, when they're kids. And fucking Lucy just goes nuts, dude, and just starts fucking ripping the fucking fair apart. And everybody's like, "There's a bomb!"
Oh, what's going on?
But here's the fucked up thing, and, you know, like, we're getting into spoiler territory here. I want a lot of people to watch this one, but because I think it's really underrated for the most part. But how she gets back with Coda is he was actually going off back home, I guess.
On a train,
like, he was only there for the summer, and she meets him at the train station and kills his entire fucking family in front of him, to the point where, like, he's in a mental institution and he doesn't remember. He doesn't know that, you know, Lucy even is like Niu, this, you know, this fucking girl that's like running around his house, Niu, is actually the one that actually, you know, took out his family, and is still able to love her through all of that, which is just like, whoa, that's crazy. You know, I think that ending for that is so fucking satisfying. You know, and obviously, like, you know, the manga just continues and continues. There's so much more story there. They chop that story at the knees, you know. And supposedly,
which is the case with a lot of anime.
Yeah, and supposedly, like, you know, Lucy in the, you know, in this, you know, particular production, like, she's dead by the end of it. You just see her little horns like get shot off, basically. Yep. Do you have anything else to say about Elfenlied? Like, are you happy that you watched it, or?
Yeah. It's actually, it's funny. I was not familiar with it until Rob told me to watch it, and I'm actually surprised that it didn't get on my radar somehow, because it came out like, in the middle of the period when I was watching anime obsessively,
Mhm.
and and I love exploding heads and really bizarre fucked up plots like that. So I'm surprised that I never actually watched it, but it was good. I liked it a lot. It was there's this interesting dichotomy between like the cuteness and the horrible violence.
Yeah.
That's sort of like, it sort of fucks with me a little, but I guess maybe it's supposed to. Also, just as is the case with a lot of anime, that some of the heteronormativity was a little annoying. Like, oh, you're a boy, you should do this. Oh, you're a girl, you should do this. And I'm just like, that stuff just gets so tiring. But
Yeah. Well, as we mentioned before, they're like miles away when it comes to certain ideals and thoughts and all. You know what I mean? So, yeah, and the other interesting thing about it that I wanted to bring up is that, like, for some reason, the really smart, supposedly smart characters, the ones that are like scientists and stuff, can't even fucking hold a cup of coffee to save their lives. They're tripping all over themselves. So weird. It's such a weird idea, you know what I mean? That the people that were like, working at a tech company wouldn't be able to, fucking, walk and chew gum at the same time. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that might be kind of dangerous.
No, but it's awesome, and you know what? I would definitely call it a horror anime in many respects. And obviously, like, it definitely has a sci-fi slant to it. I mean, that's they can't be helped as far as the story's concerned, but brutal.
Well, and it's also a really, Elfenlied is also a really good example of what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, and I was like, they can cross over genres whenever they want, and you never know what to expect. Like,
Yeah.
You don't know what the tone of the next scene is going to be in Elfenlied. You just sort of watch and let it take you on a roller coaster.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give it credit for one of the most important things is it's probably one of the most gorgeous fucking opening songs in the history of fucking anime, no question. I mean, that song just like really like attacks you emotionally, which it's supposed to do, because you're supposed to feel for, I mean, obviously there's a lot of, really damaged characters within, but, obviously that song is, that's basically Lucy's, that's her opus. Like, she's just, like, never felt like you received any redemption, you know what I mean? Never, never really felt like embraced, never felt like, she was anything. It's a really tragic fucking character, for sure. Again, we're going to talk about Elfenlied in the Dungeon Podcast, which is episode 2. You can catch it on Spotify and Apple iTunes, and our guest is Autumn Ivy. That's really it. We unpackaged as much as we could when it comes to horror anime, and I hope we did a good job. Because, like I said, I don't know everything about it. I'm just
and there's so much of it out there. I mean, of course, we missed a lot.
Oh God, yeah.
These are just the ones that we wanted to highlight.
And we wanted to touch on everything because there's something for everybody. You know what I mean? If something's like not intense enough for somebody, there's something definitely intense out there. If it's not sexual enough for you, there's definitely sexual shit out there. It's a mixed bag. And listen, I understand why even to this day, like, anime gets the shit that it gets from certain people. I totally get it. But again, it's a whole different mindset, and it's a whole different it's a whole different continent and a whole different, like, form of ideas and stuff like that. So, some of it's going to be questionable. Do you have anything else to say about it before we head off here about anime?
I mean, no, I'm a huge anime fan. I mean, so actually a lot of my favorite stories are anime. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe not necessarily horror anime, but like Clamp stuff. I'm a huge Clamp fan.
Yeah.
Gundam, just all of it. They have, for all the questionable stuff, they have a really, uncanny way of telling a satisfying story. So, I think that's what's drawn me to anime in general.
Yeah, no, there's a ton of it I love too. That's not horror related. I just started watching the original Dominion Tank Police the other day, and I fucking love it. The fact that we have this fun loving band of just it's just like police brutality for the fun of it. You know what I mean? Like sticking a grenade in some guy's mouth and putting him on like a wheel of torture, and everybody's like, yay! Like everybody's all fun. No, there's some really good shit in anime, in all genres, in all styles of it. But this is a horror show, and we talked about the horror side of it. So if you're a fan of Elfen Lied, join us for the podcast, because we're going to be talking about it a lot more. And with that, we're done. That's episode 35. Join us next time. Please like and subscribe on the Horror Web YouTube channel, and we'll scare you later. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.